Hi folks, today I'm sharing with you a structural analysis of the self-soul-spirit model with Dr. Roger Strachan. This was filmed in October of 2018, and we thought it would fit into the current series that we're doing quite nicely. There might be a little bit of repetition in things that you've heard from the past, but it's mostly reinforcing in a positive new light. Also, there's tons of new content in here that'll generate some further thinking as you consider Dr. Strachan's model of psychology. This will only have one camera angle. This was when I had less equipment back in 2018. And so you'll get the one angle of us both talking. Going forward into the future, I'll continue to provide the highest quality possible. And I really hope you enjoy this conversation. We really appreciate your support on sorting myself out, and it's just a blessing to have you all around and a part of this community. Enjoy. Dr. Strachan here is going to take us through his model, Self, Soul, Spirit, from the bottom up. And it's just a privilege to have you, so thank you for being here.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. As you and I both know, we did a sample of it and had did it more casual. And after doing that and hearing from many of the people in the podcast, they would like a more definitive structure. And so it'll take a number of episodes to do it. In the meantime, sometimes in the structure, we will do some illustrations. And behind us right here are each of our mandalas, which we'll talk about, that are the parts of the self-soul spirit. What I'm going to start with today, then I want you to ask me any questions. I'm going to start with the basic principles and the foundation. There's no way of talking about a model like this and leaving my life out. The fact that I created the model has to take in who I studied with and who were major people that I connected with and a lot of my training, and also elements of my own life, because it is a very personal phenomena to talk about one's own self, soul, spirit. It's not, even though we're going to structure it and give a structure, it's not without the living quality, and that's what makes it meaningful. And on that note, that's why we have structure of the mandala, which we'll explain fairly soon. The idea is that the more hands-on and the more you're involved with the actual sub-personalities and characteristics and styles, and you can express within those frameworks, the more alive it is, and the more it dovetails right in to our actual living experiences of who and what we are and who we encounter in life, and all elements of our life experiences. So on that note, I need to go back to some real basic principles. As a young man, very young, and very impressionable time, I spent a lot of time at my aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles' farm. My mother and stepfather were involved in the war effort. He worked at Wright-Patterson, and she worked for an electric company making parts for airplanes and equipment. So therefore, rather than leave us alone, and I'm 8 years old at the time, I went out and spent a lot of time under the tutelage and care of grandparents. And that was the beginning. I know that sounds like, how does that have to do from farms to self, soul, spirit? But it is, because that's where I got hands-on genetics. And I want to start there to share you my observations and what I experienced. And I'm going to start with a story. I was on one of the farms, and my great uncle came up to me and he said, "This sow has her piglets right now. I do not want you to go inside the enclosure. Stay outside behind the fence. This sow is mean." And
Sow just means
a sow is a female pig.
Okay.
And that's the mother.
Got it.
And she will hurt you. And she will not allow you to play with her piglets. Well, that's a little bit like saying to an 8-year-old, and you're shopping and you're in the store, when you get to the 4th aisle, leave the cookies alone. It's like, 4th aisle, cookies. Sow, piglets. And of course I didn't obey, and I should have. But I didn't. And I was full of wonder, and these piglets looked so cute running around. So she went into another area where she slept, and there was this open area out here fenced, and one of the piglets was out in that area, and I snuck through the fence, and I picked up the piglet. The minute I picked up the piglet, I hear this noise and this snorting, and I know there's 300 to 400 pounds right behind me, coming at me like lightning. And as an 8-year-old, I was scared beyond comprehension. And I ran for the fence, set the piglet down. I barely got through the fence before she hit it. And when she hit it, I imagined myself squashed. As life would have it, my great uncle came around the corner of the barn and saw all this happening. And he came over to me and he said, "I warned you." And I said, "I'm really sorry. I was very apologetic, and there's no way I could wiggle. There's nothing to wiggle from. I was there. I got caught. I was lucky to be alive." And then he went on. "That's it. This sow is dinner next week. So I'm going to butcher it, and then I'm going to share it with our neighbors, some of the parts, and when they butcher something later down the line, they'll give back, because we can't eat this whole pig. And I've got another sow that I'm going to start breeding, and she's going to have the piglets. And I've already had one litter with her, and she's really sweet, and she lets people pick up." The little 8-year-old got it. Oh my God. Not all sows are alike. And the way you solve it is you take that sow out of the picture that's mean, so nobody gets hurt, and we get to eat, and it works out fine because we need the meat anyway, and she's eventually going to be eaten, and we get another sow. And this one's different. It was that notion of different. From there on in, I looked around. How are the chickens the same? How are they different? Wow, they're all different. And the first element of diversity happened to me at 8 years old. Now, I'll go on quickly with my life and it developed, but then I'll go back and get a couple other stories that really cement the foundation of this model. And so as I kept developing and growing, I was looking to how people were different inside as much as they tried to present one voice. And I would see that sometimes people would be wrestling within themselves and they wasn't sure how they were going to answer. And I came up with the first idea, wow, we have many voices inside. If we have many voices inside, we have many parts. From there on in, I began to study the human condition. It was not, and I should say it differently, it was very easy to understand why I went to study the human being. And I took, my first 2 degrees were in theology and philosophy. and the basic understanding of humans from a theological, philosophical point of view. That would element the origins. I was a freshman in college when I knew I was going to get my next degrees after these two, a BA and a master's in theology, that I was going to get a degree in psychology. So I started taking courses even then, so that when I'd be admitted to the next university, why, it would be in psychology. And I went on to get my BA, master's, and PhD. In 1946, our VA hospitals filled up. And you can basically date clinical psychology as that's when the big push came. We needed to train people for our veterans. We also needed to train PhDs. The first training were called 90-day wonders. They had top psychologists go out and interview people and pick those who seemed to have the most proclivity and natural ability to be therapists. And then they chose their 90 from that.
How did they find them?
They found them by advertising, by soliciting, by they went to all kinds of.
So they were recruiting.
They were recruiting, and they
because
were
the
going to train
problem
them.
was so bad for
They're going to train them in 90 days and 90 people. Okay.
Okay.
And they call them 90-day wonders. And actually, they end up training more than 90. But the upshot of it all was you could not distinguish between trained therapists, and the 90-day wonders. They were that good because of their naturalness. And that started something going and said, oh, wow. If they're born that way, then it's got to be genetic. It's got to be that they come into the world with these skills.
Therapists are born, not made.
Yes. Now, obviously there are many therapists that learn to be therapists.
But the natural ability is
right.
inborn.
In the 1960s, approximately 10 years after the University of Colorado and the committee to put together a PhD program, as well as training these people to go into the VA hospital right away, the committee ended and implemented in 1949 the scientist-practitioner model. That means you had to learn as much biology as you did clinical. And when I say biology, I'm including all the elements: neurophysiology, neuropsychology. Get very much involved in social behavior, and every element like that that has a biological component. So now you're studying genders as well. And their position was that to truly understand the individual, you need to see all of the biological component with all of the social clinical elements. I started to say in the early 60s, UCLA had a 3-year program for the PhD in psychology. And they wanted thinking about adding a 4th year. Before they did that, they had their top therapists evaluate a group coming in on the first year. And they evaluated those who would, in a prioritized level, in a level of capacity and ability, the top ones that they select and those that were lower on the list, according to what they perceived as their ability to be good therapists. At the end of 3 years, they evaluated the same. and the lists were the same. Taking the education may have improved your skills, but it had not improved at all. The same group that was picked to be the best therapist in the first year were the same ones in the third year. And they said it'd be punitive to add a fourth year, and they left the program alone.
Wow. So let me summarize real quick what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is that the initial realization was that differences are everywhere in nature, but then later on you started realizing it the way that people struggle with their own parts, or some take more power than others, and some people are just different than others, and it has nothing to do with necessarily what chicken coop you're in, but just the fact that you are a person makes you a little different.
Exactly.
Then later on in your studies, you started to verify these facts through understanding the therapists that were born, not made, and that was proved out through their education.
Many ways.
Many different ways that was proved out. And then you went on to do more studies that verified that. But really, that set the foundation for the self-soul-spirit model.
Yes.
Great. So where are we now? Where do we go from there?
So we need now to see that it's not just nurture, life experiences. It's not just nature, genetics, and how you come in biologically. It's the interaction of the two. Yet there was another phenomena, and I appreciate my degrees in philosophy and theology because that added the component of the soul. And so self is a composite of nature, nurture, what we bring in, how life interacts, depending on the clustering of the genes. There's not a single gene determinant for most things, particularly those of a psychological nature. And then, who's the guiding force? The early Greeks decided that self was the entity that was mundane here on earth, carrying out. But that mundane set of characteristics tied to the earth, tied to living, tied to experience, was driven or directed by a life force, and they called it the soul. In that process, they also identified what they considered the great mysteries of life, our origin, and how we've developed over time. And then those universal features. And they called that espire. So soul was called psyche, or anima, or animus, given the gender difference. And spirit was called espire. And the die was cast. Now I want to put in this small thing. The reason I chose those terms, because they already had a history.
Self, soul, spirit.
Self, soul, spirit.
They're just woven into history.
They're just woven into the history. And rather than create new terms, I used terms that had meaning
to
over
what's
the
already
years.
happening.
Yes.
Right, so you're building off of foundation.
Now, let's take soul. Soul has been identified more recently as consciousness, essence, core, being. Being is a big word used among philosophers. And the director.
The life force.
Prior to really understanding this, psychology led itself to believing that the brain was the executor and the director. And even now, when you go to take an IQ test, many times what we call soul is identified as the executive manager.
Yeah,
okay?
They think it's a prefrontal cortex function.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, the soul never went away. Not in literature, not in philosophy, not in arts, and it came around. And we're ready for one of the first principles. We've looked in all kinds of ways for how a soul lives within us, and many things were identified. One of the things identified was the heart. Another thing was the pineal gland, the central part of the brain. Recently, in the last number of years, when a pulsar lets go out of the so-called dark space of the black hole that we've given it lots of names, it turns out to be a womb for new creation. Out comes gases, they form suns. Out comes little bits of matter and a little bit of electricity. They come together and form asteroids and what we come to call planets. Planets have more potential. Not that we have not only, I would pay it this way, we haven't been able to find the soul in the asteroid, but we believe it's there. Okay, it's just a matter of how we discover life.
Who's we?
We being all the colleagues in studying astronomy, physics, quantum physics, theology, philosophy, psychology, psychiatry, a major number of sciences, sociology, anthropology. They're all devoted to understanding our beginnings and the human condition. Once we got into genetics, and the genome was done in 2003, that has directed the nature and the information. We'll talk later about that, but I want to go back to the underpinnings and some of my life events. As I grew up and as I saw these things, I entered college and I studied. I became extremely fascinated with the relationship between the brain and what we call soul or life force. And it didn't take long for me, with interviews and anecdotal and even following some forms of research, to believe that the soul directed the brain. Consciousness directed the brain. And the brain is a highfalutin computer that does what our soul and other parts of us direct it to. Ergo, in the last number of years, we've had a huge gathering of various professionals who are looking at consciousness in regards to how you actually change or direct or move through consciousness. The work on mindfulness, for example, Kabat-Zinn's work, on and on. Many Buddhists have gotten into consciousness and opening up that sense of consciousness and then to see how it plays out in the brain. We've done all kinds of experiments with this.
Let me actually summarize again. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we've established self. Self is the myriad of genetic forces. It's polygenic, meaning multiple variants of genes interacting together to create personality traits. Self.
Yes.
Okay? That's something that interacts with nature. Nature and nurture come together and create experience. Soul. Life force that directs self.
Yes.
Now, the brain is the unconscious, or you don't like that word as I remember, but the brain is the programmer, or the computer, excuse me, that runs the program.
Let me stop you for 1 second. The soul utilizes all of us, all of our parts, our liver, our heart. For a long time, the heart was thought to be the soul. So the brain isn't any different than any other organ. It's another organ. So you don't want to see it in regards to be consciousness. Consciousness is in the soul and the parts of the self as it gets destroyed.
Right. So the brain is running behavior and patterns, programs that are interacting with how life is going for us, right? So
well, it's even more complicated than that. The brain is running in areas that are reflexive all the way up to areas that are controlled.
prefrontal.
So the brain does not work on itself without instruction.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to get at. And the
But
soul.
there's another element you got to get in here, though. Why we thought the brain was us and the director is because the brain is like a supercomputer. I want to give you a simple illustration so you understand this better. A few years ago, the top Russian chess player played the computer. What he decided to do was not to play any form of orthodox chess moves, and he played quite unorthodox. He took a chance at that he might get clobbered very easy. But what happened is, the computer did not have in its memory bank the moves he made, and he won that game. But here's what he said: every move I made, that computer logged in. That computer now will collate all that. There's a very good chance that I will not be able to beat the computer again. Now, what are the phenomena there? The phenomena are a chess game has only so many parameters. There's only so many factors. There's only so many moves. So it's finite. The computer will learn all that finite, okay? And then it will improve in its timing and in its proof of the puzzle. Another example. It used to take the early computers, when we submitted the Rubik Cube to it, 10, 15 minutes, sometimes a little longer. Very quickly, it was down to seconds. Because every time the computer, like the brain, on some brains, I've worked with people that looked at the Rubik Cube, didn't make any move, saw the patterns in the brain, which the brain is capable of for some people, and immediately solved it. That's the way the computer does it.
Mm-hmm.
It sees the overall gestalt, then it just makes all the moves and lines it up.
Right.
Now,
So
you have to start thinking of the brain as a master computer. Here's the difference. The brain, because of consciousness and the soul, has much more creativity and imagination. All the movies we're making now about robots and computers, we still don't know whether it can go beyond from finite to infinite. So let's take another example, because your question is so right on. They made the movie Apollo 13. What happened in the movie and happened in real life is they lost their oxygen and their instruments for it. Okay? That means they're going to die. Okay? And they knew how much oxygen they had left. And here's where consciousness and brain power work together. They created their own oxygen mask and lived. Now I want to show you the beauty of this. When von Braun came and headed much of the science of our NASA,
who was von Braun?
he was the scientist who created the propulsion, the missiles. He was German, and those missiles that landed on England in the Second World War were his creation.
Okay.
When we got to Berlin, we weren't interested in any more capturing. We went for von Braun. We beat the Russians there, and we brought him back. He did not go to the Nuremberg trials. He came and we utilized his great skill. A friend of mine worked 2 levels under him and said von Braun could only talk about with 3 or 4 people in the world at his level of notion of physics and quantum physics. That's amazing.
Very intelligent.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I mean, particularly in those areas. Remember, intelligence is global, but this is an element of his intelligence. He didn't want any humans in the space. Once Apollo 13 occurred, it's like, oh yeah. And the most he conceded to in the early years was a chimpanzee, a monkey. Now, what am I saying? Von Braun saw the world through mechanical brain, okay? And so he saw humans as messing up in the missiles.
Mm-hmm.
And what the point I'm making is our brains and our consciousness are creative and imaginative. We now have geniuses that are being studied that can create new ideas and new mechanical things with little or no antecedents. They don't have to build on. Everything I'm sharing with you, I build on other people's work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, some of my creativity has come out in the way that I designed it. The point is that I didn't do anything that anybody else of, good intelligence could do as well. And so I think you have to really see how powerful the brain is. But the brain follows the same rules of genetics.
The brain is acting based on the genetic capacity to act.
Yes.
What parts do I have that I can act with?
No.
No?
The brain continues to mutate and improve. We are brighter now.
Wait. What did I say in that was...
What you said it had to do with the parts, per se.
No, I'm saying... What I'm trying to illustrate to see if this is what you're saying is that you're saying the soul and the parts direct the brain. And the brain...
No, I'm saying the soul. The parts direct it, but the real living force of the creativity comes out... Yeah. Okay. I agree that the parts have a part in it, but theirs is minimal compared to the soul.
Understood. Consciousness is paramount.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
There we go.
But give me a shot here to illustrate something, because I want to get your feedback if I'm hearing the deeper underlying structure here of self, soul, spirit. Come in with the parts and the soul, the life force.
Right.
The brain habituates and runs a program. The computer...
I don't like the word program. You just say it acts.
The brain acts.
Right.
The brain develops different patterns.
Sometimes not. I don't want you to move in to how things are alike. I want you to see the brain can switch.
When you were working with me as a counselor, alongside of our teaching that we're continuing to do, we found one of my parts, the challenger.
Right.
The challenger likes to challenge.
Yes.
Just like right now.
Right now.
Right? Like saying, wait, listen, let me make sure I'm getting this right. Let me make sure you're hearing what I'm
Exactly.
saying. We found the challenger. The challenger in the past ran a pattern, and the pattern was, I will push other people away so I can protect my sensitivity, which is another part up there.
Yes.
We worked with that challenger.
I need to interrupt you, though. Okay? Your responses weren't always the same.
It wasn't the same.
So that's why it's not a pattern. Your
You
responses
don't
were
think it's a brain
individual.
circuit?
No, that's what I keep saying. But you didn't react the identical way each time when the challenger came out.
No.
The challenger weighed the situation, gave the information to the brain, and the brain then did the speaking or the hearing or the jumping up and down, which you need to see.
But now my challenger interacts differently based on interventions that we did. Now
I'm saying your challenger, before we did those work, didn't act all the same.
Okay.
Okay?
There was differences.
Let's use the illustration based upon an analogy. Sometimes your challenger brought 10 pounds to a 1 pound argument.
That was a theme.
Sometimes your challenger only brought 4.
True.
The point I want you to see is the challenger instructed the brain on how much you're going to give to this situation. Therefore, the challenger makes unique responses. Sometimes it's more data comes. We don't change our genetic predisposition. We adapt that predisposition to choices we want to make.
Which is what we did with the
Yes.
challenger.
Yes.
And we combined soul
Now,
with
what
it.
you need to take out of your vocabulary is that word pattern,
Why?
because
Why would I
it
take...
defeats the uniqueness of every situation. Some of the great philosophy has come out of existentialism and come out of psychology and people like Ram Dass, who wrote a book entitled it, Be Here Now. This moment is the only moment you have in life. Nothing you did in the past has direct relationship. It has some indirect relationship. And you might have to go over some of that. Oh, this is my wife, not my mother, who I'm still pissed at for X, Y, or Z. Oh, I don't have to do the same reaction. Or you
so
find
that
yourself...
would be what I was calling a pattern.
Yeah, but it's not a pattern.
What would you call it?
A response.
Okay, so let me rephrase everything in your language and you tell me if it's right.
Gotcha.
The challenger had particular responses that...
No,
that
it didn't have particular. It had individualized one.
It had a response.
Every response was brand new.
Yes, but due to the work we did, it opened up a new choice for me. A new choice of how to relate to the challenger. And then I was able to then...
Okay, I'm gonna challenge you.
This is dense. This is...
The work that we did brought in other parts of you, and they said to the challenger as he started to go...
Started to bring 10 pounds.
Whatever it was he's going to do. He might have been 50 pounds. Well, however he went, just looked at the situation and decided how to moderate it, change it, tell the side. So all the way to shut your mouth, challenger, and then I'm going to speak for you. Let's use me as an illustration. Up there on my mandala is the warrior.
Yep.
Very strong, very independent, acts independently, but every situation is not the same, so he acts differently. And he acts according to what goes on. And he acts according to how high he's triggered within himself with the energy he's creating, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm 6 years old. It's my birthday. The day before my birthday, I come in with a black eye. My father asked why I have the black eye. I said, because my little friend so-and-so called you a drunk. And I said, he looks worse than I do.
Mm-hmm. At 6.
At 6.
Okay.
My father said, I'll come to your birthday tomorrow, sober. I said, I really want you to do that. Please don't come drunk. We agreed on a contract. The next day, my father got off work early, and the alcoholic in him said, we got time. And one drink led to another, and he came in late for the party, drunk.
Okay.
The warrior
And you.
in me ordered him out and sent the kids home. 6 years old.
That was an inborn part.
Yes. Now, how do I know this? My father devotes 3 paragraphs in his memoirs. What happened from there on in? For the rest of my life, my father was a very strong man and did really well in the world, was intimidated by me. Even though he would try bully tactics, they all went up in smoke. From 6 years old.
He was intimidated by that part of you that was a warrior.
Yes. But that warrior
So
was backed up by my soul. I didn't know it at the time. Now, one story that he also tells is 1 year later, to show you how impactful the situation was. My mother's getting a divorce. We're staying with our grandparents, my brother, my mother, and I. My father comes to plead his case not to get a divorce. He doesn't talk to the grandparents and my mother at first. He comes down the darkened hallway where I've gotten up out of bed, probably on my way to go to the bathroom, and he gets down on his hands and knees and he pleads me to tell my mother not to divorce him.
Mm-hmm.
6 years old, out of the party. 7, the system is taken. Now, he didn't always approach me on that much deference. And sometimes he brought out the bully. So what I'm trying to get you to see...
The bully in him.
Yes.
Yeah,
that every moment is a brand new moment. So now I'm going to really cut right to the chase. You ready?
Yeah, please cut to the chase, yes.
In 1985, Jerome Kagan wrote in his book, and he has continued a lot, there is no evidence to validate that parents or siblings have any real strong interaction or determination about the personality of one of their children. He set the thing which we now operate. And I've talked to thousands of people. And when I talk to parents, I say, when you really look at it, do children grow up in spite of you and not because of you? And you do your best to try to direct and guide, but they really grow up in spite of you. You say, oh my God, yes. And that led to the next most important thing. The thing that I want you to see is terms like pattern,
Pathology.
That's the way we're alike,
mm-hmm.
or pathology, the labeling. And they missed the boat. We are who we are, and we don't put either pejorative terms like the labeling of the DSM. They're very pejorative. And they're shameful.
DSM meaning the Diagnostical Statistical Manual
yes.
for Psychology, for
right.
Psychiatry.
Right.
Very pejorative labels.
But again, I want to lead to the next reason. We've tried to spend so much time in psychology, understanding how we're alike,
rather than how we're different.
No, how we're unique.
Unique. So this brings us to something that I think is a cornerstone of the self-soul-spirit model. Is we don't operate based on labels. We operate based on descriptions. You've said that to me.
We use I can describe what you're doing. You're just behaving.
Okay.
We attached values to your behavior.
Right.
Good, bad,
but for self-soul-spirit, for the model,
with
it's
the
very
model,
important.
there are no values.
It's very important, yeah.
You just are who you are.
You just are, and we're not operating based on labels of who I am.
Exactly.
We're operating based on the unique descriptions.
Of your behavior,
yes.
Of your attitudes, of the way they weave together, of your belief systems. We put it together and describe that with the manifestation is your behavior.
Yeah, how it's acted out.
Exactly.
Okay. So what...
Can I give you a...
How would you... Hold on a second. I want to hear in your words... Raj, how would you describe what happened with my challenger and where I am today versus where I was a few years ago? In your own words, so I feel like I understand.
Since I've consulted with your father's business where this event occurs that we're talking about right now, and since I'm working with you on your mandala and working with you as a mentor in your education, I'm following you and I'm listening to you, and you bring me this story.
Mm-hmm.
And as I hear you, I then put on the table something for you to look at.
Which was?
Let's replay it right now.
Yeah.
Here we go. Ryan, it looks to me like, I'd like you to confer, that you brought about 10 pounds to a 1 pound argument. Was your reaction from the challenger, even by your standards, way over the top?
Yes.
And how did you go away from the meeting? Did you go away justifying that it was over the top? Or did you begin to say, I really could have done that differently? Or both?
Both.
When you left the encounter, did some part of you say, Ryan, that was way over the top, that was beyond what you needed? Did some part of you justify? Or did the challenger himself say, no, I could have been heavier on it? What happened as you immediately left
the conflict?
the conflict?
When I had that particular conflict, I left very angry, and I was kind of in my car, basically cursing out some imagined force of threat. It was just basically like, get out of my space. Like, I don't want just leave me alone, basically. Like,
So you carried on more of the challenger.
I was pretty murderous at the time. I mean, I'm not like literally, but like I was very rageful.
Yeah, but I mean,
for about 30 minutes.
Was it the challenger that was doing the raging?
Yeah.
Good.
It was
Did
like
anybody else join him? Look at your mandala right now, and recollect it as best you can. And did anybody else, any self-righteous part or any other part, join? Even all the way to your soul. Does your soul support this? Or was the challenger running on his own?
The challenger was essentially running on its own, but protecting the sensitive small boy.
You realize when you said "but," you cancel the first part of the sentence.
The challenger was protecting the boy inside of me, the sensitive
Could you
part.
sense it, that the little boy was
The needed
threatened?
needed protection, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, did anybody else need protection?
No.
So, does this have historical things when the challenger came out as you were growing up and needed to protect the little boy?
Yes.
The sensitive one.
Yeah, needed to
Now you
fight.
say, are there two different parts though?
Yes.
Is there sensitive and the little boy?
No, they're this. I've since merged them.
You've merged them.
Yeah.
So most of your sensitivity filters through the little boy
Yes.
before you make
Yes.
movements.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
The challenger essentially
How long did he go?
30 minutes of yelling.
And what happened?
Called you.
Did you?
Yeah.
You didn't? Nobody else came in? Who told you to call me?
Soul.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's how this theory works.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens.
Well,
So what did the soul say to the challenger?
it's time for healing. It's time for healing. We've been holding on to this anger.
That's the global, but how about this incident?
Calmed him down, regulated the nervous system.
So why did the, not why, but what was in it for you for the soul to call me instead of just solving it yourself?
I needed clarity.
So you wanted to reach out and you trusted me to bring clarity.
Yep.
Good. So then
you
we
did.
had the encounter and here's how it went. I just put it down on the table. Ryan, did you? Oh, Rick. So now take it up from there.
So start again.
Did you bring 10 pound to a 1 pound issue?
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I feel sick.
What does your soul think?
That I had been letting this whole thing build up inside me without addressing it.
Okay. Did any other parts feel offended by the challenger?
Oh yes, it was socially inappropriate and.
But who's that? Who's the socially inappropriate?
I would say let's see here. the conceptualizer and the teacher and the worker and the
So there were quite a
boy.
few parts that had enough of the Challenger. And this event,
yeah, just getting in an unnecessary argument.
so you could only justify it for so long.
Yes.
Now this brings us, ironically, to one of the major principles we're going to set.
Okay.
The human species is the only species that does exactly what it wants to do according to its self, soul, spirit parts, then makes up stories to explain what they did. You did not make up stories on this particular occasion. You finished out what you call the rage, and before you could justify it, the soul said, this is not okay. And other parts said, this is not okay. And this is not the way I want to present myself. And certainly not the way I want to let you go on, Challenger. I'm going to challenge you. Then you pick up the phone and call me.
Yeah, and then we spent months working with that, and then eventually
Exactly.
now I have a new choice that I make with my Challenger.
But what happened when we first started working?
Be more specific. A lot of things happen.
Can I tell you what happened for me? Your Challenger did not give up easy. He didn't say,
Well,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
He came right back and tried to justify why 10 pounds was needed.
Yeah, why I was right.
And the more I ask other parts of you, the more other parts of you begin to challenge you. Well, I don't think it was right. Then I would come back and said, what did you think about what's this? Well, I don't know, but I still think it was the best thing. I said, then I said to your Challenger direct, would you rather be right than happy?
Right.
And then all of your history with the Challenger and all of your relationships in your family came to one head. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Remember that? It was an immediate. It took time to learn how you were going to judge each situation and what decide to bring with it. And sometimes you didn't even bring the Challenger. You literally put yourself in the other person's position or the part of them, and oh, I can understand that.
Yeah.
And once you didn't have to hire the Challenger for anything that looked conflictual, you had many more choices. That's the word you just used.
Yeah, the Challenger's the last resort. Now.
Okay, now.
Or the Challenger can also be a loving Challenger and
Right.
challenge things lightly instead of with 10 pounds.
Now here's another thing that I did in the work. And I'll see if you remember this. I asked your soul to thank the Challenger for doing such a great job all these years, thinking the way he was acting on each situation was really needed.
Yeah.
So do you remember me asking you that?
Yeah.
And you got really perplexed. Why would I tell this, and we'll have to use a song term here, why would I tell this asshole that he did a good job when all he did is cause me trouble?
Right.
And then I said this, and this is most profound for the theory, because the Challenger, his belief system was he was doing right by you. He was protecting the little boy. He was bringing anything that he thought was needed to the occasion. And if he overshot it, well, then they'll get the point faster.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that you then took away fighting within yourself and listening to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Then the healing took its time over, or you practiced different kinds of things.
Yes.
And you checked in as the Challenger with other parts to get some information as to whether. Now, this is one of those areas where you and I have some similarity. The difference between your Challenger and my warrior is my warrior goes for annihilation, goes for destruction. Not good in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I had to learn not to see him as a repository of anger, but to see him for what he actually did. You've done the same thing with your challenger. And you now use your challenger like you're using it right here, in a very profound, significant
Just
way.
a conversation.
To get to that question you want.
Yes.
To challenge my position and make me work harder to explain it. I think that's wonderful. It's a very profound way of using the challenger and gets more data.
So
I don't use my warrior in conflict resolution.
It doesn't work for you because you'll...
No, it doesn't work. It's terrible on the relationship.
Oh, I understand.
But I want to be careful. I'm not saying that in any form of arrogance. I'm saying that in humility because there's more to it. Many times in my relationship, and I get in it with a spouse, I'll announce that he's there and I take him out so the thing doesn't go out of kilter. Okay, we're going to eventually have this conflict resolution. But right now, he's in control of the system. So my lover, my scientist, my teacher, my philosopher, my little boy even, my facilitator, which is a proactive facilitator, commonly thought of as a therapist, and they all take the warrior out of the room. Literally. I leave
They walk him out.
They walk him out. But guess what? The warrior's saying, you know I'm right, bitch. He's got to throw a couple things over the shoulder. And what happened is, because I did that in the last 40 years with the two major marriages, they got it.
They let you walk yourself
They
out.
let me walk myself back because I was coming back to the conflict with my lover and my manager and parts to look at it on the basis of what are we having a conflict like?
How can we resolve this?
Yes.
Right.
Because I don't want to say, well, we're never going to talk about it. Whatever that conflict is, we're going to solve it.
Got it.
Now I want to reverse it. Meadow, my last wife, and we were together almost 20 years, 18 or so. We were doing a part of our house, and she took on the living room. And the stereo equipment and television.
You're renovating?
No, we're just doing that room.
Oh, okay. You're working on a room.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've already done the construction. And there was a place where there had been a door, and I just put shelves in there, and all the stereo then was, inside that section. So she finished it all, and what happened is she put a couch, which is perfectly set, but it was in front of this opening. And the builder in me said, "Oh, you can't have that, it's not aesthetic." And she said, "I've worked on this 2.5 months. Right now my judge is out."
The part of her?
Yes.
Yeah.
She says, "Don't even go there. You solve it." She freed me from an argument of who's right about furniture in front of a door opening to a very pragmatic solution. So, being a builder, I looked at the wall, said, wow. I closed it off, trimmed it out, went around to the other side, opened it up, and made a pantry.
That's awesome. Creative choice.
Creative choice.
So
Now,
here we are at about the end of this first part. It's been over.
how did we get that far?
I know, it went fast.
Can I drop a few principles?
Well, here's
for
what
you?
I wanted to say. If you could take just 5 minutes or less and summarize what we've established.
Well, rather than summarize only, I'd like to leave the principles.
Yeah, leave the principles. That's
Okay,
fine. Whatever
let's
you need
start
to
with
do
the
to wrap it
principles.
up.
The principles are, every one of us is unique. Therefore, you can't use group likeness on us, whether it's the Enneagram, whether it's, astrology,
Pathology.
yeah, or the test that we did. Everybody has to be evaluated by their own. Ergo, what do they bring in? How do those parts interact with life? How are they in and up to date? How are they operating? We just had a few examples of that. So there's the first thing. Secondly, we're all connected. The Buddhists are correct that there is no space, and now the scientists and physicists would agree there's no space. So we're all connected, and we're all individualized as units. Therefore, you have to approach every human being as unique. You cannot then say any reaction will be standardized. Okay? Therefore, you have to look at each one. Imagine that I brought a victim into the world instead of a warrior. Then I would have been really upset and felt victimized by
your dad,
my
and
father's
blah, blah, blah,
behavior,
and your stepdad, and
my
everything.
stepdad.
Got it.
Right. Now, the next thing is, there's no such thing as influence. There's only attraction and connection. And if we're attracted to something, and the stronger the attraction, it goes there. Now, there are some likelihoods. A highly intelligent, chess-playing, scholastically, people which we commonly call nerds, they're in every high school. They don't join gangs that are going to kill people. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So there's correlation kind of phenomena. We used to joke, piano players...
Because they're not attracted to it.
Yeah, piano players, and there's no correlation between piano players and delinquent kids. But there's a high correlation between non-delinquent kids and piano players. Okay? Now, that's not meant to be universal. What it says is some things correlate, but that doesn't mean they're predictable. Okay, and it doesn't mean cause and effect.
Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Yes,
that's a famous one.
Yes. Now, the next principle. We have to spend years studying how the factors of our uniqueness have their underpinnings both in genetics and in the kind of treatment we received. There's lots and lots of books written about how to raise a child, okay? But here it is. Safety, from the infancy on. By the way, these 5 apply to any relationship. So we have safety, predictability. The predictability is not geographic. The predictability is about the relationship between the parents, the caregiver, and the child. Room to grow, so that they're not a clone and they have lots of room for their own independence. Mutual respect, it has to go both directions. One of the things we got into was entitlement, and kids came up not respecting their parents, but expecting the parents to respect their every wish. Okay, it's got to go both directions. And last of all, the most magnificent thing that everybody studies, and we don't know any more about them when we started, love. We know what it feels like. We know how to experience it. We know what it does within our body. We know the power of love. But we don't really understand its origin, its essence, its being. These others are more pragmatic, and we can measure them easy. But there it is. Safety, predictability, room to grow, mutual respect, love.
5 foundations of relationship.
Yes.
Whether it's raising a child or a significant other.
Exactly. Now we can add other addendums under some of those.
And that's part of the self-soul-spirit model?
That's part of the idea of how we relate.
Because you don't influence your kids, you just provide room for them to grow.
Yes.
And all those things you mentioned.
And the other things I do try to redirect. No, as a parent, I try to redirect behavior that I think is not going to serve them well. That's a right I have as a parent. If they're moving to steal, I'm going to try to confront that and deal with it and see that that's not a way to move through the world successfully.
Good.
I have that right as a parent. Now, the other principle is what the existentialists have handed us, and that is there is no past and there is no future. There's only this moment. That is tremendously profound. That means we focus right here, right now, and we do not try to evaluate from the past using the concept of pattern. I'll give you an example in law, and I worked a lot with attorneys. I love being a forensic psychologist, helping pick juries and how to work with them and so forth. A man could lie 9 times straight, and we have a record of every lie. And when we put him on the stand today, he could be telling the truth. These 9 lies don't mean how he'll respond today. We can talk about percentages and likelihood. What we cannot talk about is universals. And we have all kinds of funny things that validate it. So a movie that I just adore, and this is where we'll stop, is White Men Can't Jump, with Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes. And there's a line in there that Wesley uses, and he says, "Even the sunshine shines on a dog's ass once in a while." Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Sorting Myself Out. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss anything going forward. We really appreciate all your support, and we will continue providing you content. Thank you.